Hello everyone. Today we're doing something a little bit different from my normal wrap-ups. I'm just going to talk about some books that I read recently, most of them being books that I really enjoyed, tell you a little bit about why, and so on. Often, at the end of a month or halfway through a month, I've been doing a tier ranking. Technology has really been not compliant with me recently, so that's been a pain in the half. Basically, my tier list was not working out. We'll keep it, I'll spare you the details there. So I'm just going to talk about them. And that's the video, but it's going to be more relaxed. I also want the freedom to not talk about certain books. If there are books that either don't fit the format well, or I just don't have that much to say about them, I don't want to feel like, oh, I got to rank all of them. So I might do something at the end of the year, but this is what we're doing for now. And we're going to start with a little bit of show and tell, which I normally don't do, but this isn't me bragging about my great income or about all of the special editions that I got last month. This is to brag on my wife. My lovely wife, who's very supportive of my dorky hobbies. I can't afford many special editions, nor do I really see the appeal of many of them. There's a lot of special editions that I'm glad other people enjoy, but often aren't exactly what I would want in like a nice version of a book. But there's one big exception to this, and that is the Folio Society copy of The Book of the New Sun. And it's been in the background already of some of my videos, but just wanted to show off. My wife, for Father's Day, got this for me, which was very kind of her. And as it turns out, is just in time, because I'm not going to do a big like show off of the whole set, but it is quite fitting because I am still a part of the ongoing read-along of Book of the New Sun that John from Talking Story started, and we just read The Claw of the Conciliator. So this is Shadow and Claw in the Folio Society copy. This would be the Claw of the Conciliator cover. So this is my third time going through it now. And I've got these great editions that will represent the series going forward for the rest of the video here. So let's just slide that gently there, and that's where it belongs. Anyway, Claw of the Conciliator. This is one of the trickier books in Book of the New Sun. I actually got a couple of people who messaged me or commented on some of my Wolfe stuff recently who were like, yeah, I really enjoyed Shadow, but man, I had a hard time with that Claw of the Conciliator novel. And I think it's the most challenging, maybe not the most challenging Wolfe novel I've ever read, but it's probably in the top 3. I think Earth of the New Sun is still a little bit more indecipherable, is still a little bit more difficult, but Claw definitely takes things to the next level. The good news is that once you get through Claw of the Conciliator, the rest of the main 4 books are not as difficult or dense or confusing as that second book is. It's also because Severian is at his worst behavior in Claw of the Conciliator. When people talk about not liking Severian as a protagonist, usually they're talking about that book. Okay, so that doesn't make things easier. But there's the whole sequence with Apu Panchow at the end of the book is obviously confusing and difficult for some people to get a grasp on. There's Dr. Talos's play in the middle of the book, which when Wolfe originally wrote Book of the New Sun as a trilogy, before the editor made him revise Book 3 and split it into Book 3 and 4, that play from Dr. Talos was meant to be the center, like chapter-wise, of the trilogy. So it really is like the central piece to the quartet. And it's challenging, it's difficult. What did I get on my third time reading through? I don't know that I had any like, whoa, mind-blowing revelations, that at least that I'm going to share here. Other than to say, each time I reread them, I enjoy them more. The whole sequence with Apu Panchow at the end of it actually made sense to me for the first time. And a part of that's having the context of Earth of the New Sun too. It's like, oh, okay, I get what's going on here. So for the first time ever, that finally clicked. One of the weird things with Wolfe is because he's seen as an intellectual sci-fi author and, you know, sort of highbrow, you have kind of two sides to this. One is a snobby, a certain like snobby sense of those who read him. Like, well, I read Gene Wolfe. I have a story that I'll tell about that in just a second here. And then on the other end, you have people who are like, you only like that because you want to sound smart. And like, I don't want to be a snob. It's actually like really bugs me when other people come off that way, and so I try really hard to not come off that way myself. I'm like, well, you just didn't get it, you just didn't read it right. And so I've been questioning myself as I've reread, and I mentioned this in my video about Shadow of the Torturer, of like, okay, am I just reading this because it makes me feel good to be a Gene Wolfe fan? And especially with the New Sun books, every time I go through them, it's like, dang, like these are so good. I love this so much. His writing, the world, Severian's journey, so much about it is just great. I'll tell one more anecdote and then we'll move on about like Wolfe and snobbiness and all of that. There was, at one point earlier on in my time on YouTube, I was sharing a lot of like my YouTube stuff on Reddit, on different Reddit pages, and quickly decided that's not a great way of spreading my videos around. But one of the videos that I made was contrasting the Book of the New Sun to the Broken Empire books by Mark Lawrence. And that's probably one of my favorite videos that I've made. I'm pretty proud of that one, actually. And I think there's some interesting things that are similar and some things that contrast. And I had somebody on Reddit who did not watch the video, but they commented, they said, if you think Mark Lawrence wrote anywhere similar to how the brilliant Master Gene Wolfe did, then you clearly don't understand a single thing about Wolfe and are a very shallow reader of him. That's almost a quote, that part of it. I don't understand anything about Wolfe and I'm a very shallow reader of him, which, that may be true. But what cracked me up was he said, if you want real philosophical fantasy, you should be reading R. Scott Baker. And then he went off about how much he loved Baker as well, which cracked me up because one, I have read R. Scott Baker and had even at the time of that video, and two, like Baker philosophically is like 180 degrees opposite of Wolfe, like, and we can go into that more in a later video, but is very much antithetical to Wolfe's worldview. So that cracked me up hearing that. But anyway, that's Claw the Conciliator with numerous digressions. This is the greatest way to like hold audience attention, is to ramble at them about things that have nothing to do with what you're talking about. Let's talk about something a little bit different, and that is going to be, I didn't abandon my TBR this last month, but I had something that sort of took it over unexpectedly. Something I've meant to come back to for a while, but have been putting off, and that is The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. This has been on my TBR for many years. Heard about it from Alan, as I'm sure many people have. And I read book one, A Shadow in Summer, almost 2 years ago, and was just kind of like, it's fine, but it's not great. And I realized upon rereading A Shadow in Summer, this is actually a time where I can say I read it wrong. I actually missed a couple of key plot things that Daniel Abraham planted early on that I skimmed over, I missed somehow, and it kind of sent me into a funk because things weren't clicking towards the end of the book. But because Alan and Josh from Red Fury Books and John from Talking Story are reading through The Long Price Quartet, just hearing them talk about it and hearing them share about how much they loved it, I was like, man, like that's the type of thing I love in fantasy novels. Maybe I should try that again. So I reread A Shadow in Summer and loved it. It was amazing. It was so good. And then went on to A Betrayal in Winter, which is book 2. So we're going to talk about these books briefly and like why they're so great. So everybody does when they're pitching a book, they say it's Game of Thrones meets this. And I jokingly messaged Alan and was like, so is The Long Price Quartet like a Game of Thrones meets Hamilton? Because one of the things that I love about the musical Hamilton is that you see these two like young bucks at the beginning of this time of revolution, and then how their decisions and the conflicts that they have with each other still continue through their entire lives until the end of the musical. And The Long Price Quartet, one of the things that it's famous for is that book 1 happens when they're teenagers, book 2 is when they're in their 30s, book 3 is, I think, in their 40s and 50s, and then book 4 is like 60s and 70s. So there's big time jumps in between each book, and you primarily follow 2 young men who start going to what's called a poet school, and they make very different decisions at this poet school that set them on almost opposite tracks in life that keep intersecting throughout the books. And so the poet school has a little bit to do with the magic system. The Long Price Quartet has one of my favorite magic systems out there, which is that these poets are basically the world's wizards. And if they can come up with the perfect poem, essentially spells, they can conjure up the perfect embodiment of sort of an idea that the poet can then control. So basically what they do is they control, in A Shadow in Summer, the poet has crafted a being that's called Seedless, is his nickname. But his full name is called Removing the Part That Continues. And these beings are essentially small gods, demigods, almost genies. Genies is probably the closest equivalent to it. But it is part of the poet's soul, but then also these ideas that are crafted in the poems. The poet is able to conjure this genie demon being. And Seedless, removing the part that continues, they use in the cotton trade because they can bring a whole room full of cotton, and instead of needing somebody to hand pick out the seeds or invent a machine to do it, Seedless can literally snap his fingers and all the seeds are removed from the cotton. He removes the part that continues. And then in book 2, and so these creatures are called Ondat. And in book 2, the main Ondat that we encounter is called Stone Made Soft. And sort of his powers, he can take stone and make it soft. So he's used in mining. So they'll create just mine shafts just by him making the stone soft. And it's like dirt, it's like mud. They can just shovel it out. He could level mountains with his power. And so these things are almost like atomically powered beings that the different kings that run like city-states can control. Well, they have like appointed poets who control these beings. And so the cool thing about the Long Price Quartet is that, or one of the cool things, is that each book is an individual story. So Shadow in Summer is sort of like its own story with a beginning, a middle, and end, and a conclusion. And then book 2 follows almost an entirely new cast of characters in a different location, but with the main core of these two men who started at poet school and made very different decisions in response to the training at poet school. So book 2 follows a whole new set of characters and a new situation over a decade later, where these two men's lives intersect and the conflicts that they find themselves in. And so one of the things that is so interesting is it's called the Long Price Quartet, and very small decisions that seem insignificant in one book have major ramifications in another book. So I flew through book 1, and Daniel Abraham's writing is very digestible. It's very elegant in a certain sense, where it doesn't feel like he's just, this is first draft. Like, he has a very good handle on his vocabulary, on the word choices that he uses, and yet it's not overly flowery. It doesn't seem like he's using a thesaurus or being overly verbose with his writing. It's very, very readable. And so flew through book 1. I wanted to jump into book 2 almost immediately. Sadly, I didn't. But now I finished up book 2 rather recently, and I'm when this video is done, I'm going to be hopping into book 3 again. It's just, these books are so good, and I'm so interested to see where this story is going to end. So, didn't tell you a whole lot about the plot, more just the setup and conceit of the books, but if you haven't read the Long Price Quartet, one of the pitching points that people will say, and it's true, is that all 4 books put together of the Long Price Quartet are shorter than The Way of Kings. So, like, people are willing to wait it out with, like, a big Sanderson tome, and you can read a whole quartet in the same length of time. And Daniel Abraham does not write, these are not action-centered books. Like, in 2 books, the closest you get to an action scene is there's a bit where, like, an assassin corners a guy and, like, stabs him. And that's it. Like, that's the most action we've had so far in 2 books, but they're riveting. They're so good. There's not a wasted scene. There's not a wasted chapter. Every scene, like, moves the plot forward, tells us something new about the world, tells us something new about the characters. I'm just adoring the way that he's telling this story, so I can't wait to get to the end of this. This was not on my TBR plans at all for the month. I plan to return to Long Price Quartet at some point, but certainly not this soon. And this has been just an absolute treat, an absolute treat and a half. So I know Alan's hyped these books up a lot, but still, they're not widely read in terms of fantasy, and they don't have a big name like Abercrombie or Sanderson or John Gwynne attached to them. You know, Daniel Abraham's more known for his work on the Expanse books, so definitely give these a shot. And I'm going to read more Daniel Abraham when I'm done with these. I've already got the Kithamar books lined up, so can't wait for that. On that note, let's talk about something that I've been reading for a very, very long time. And that is, I started this around this time last year, actually. and this is Flannery O'Connor. This is A Good Man is Hard to Find. In terms of American short story authors, like Flannery O'Connor is one of the best known ones, and probably one of my favorites, even just from this one short story collection. I took this slowly. I've been reading it for a year. Would read a story, would read 2 stories, and then wait a while, and then read another one maybe a month later. And I've never read an author who, well, that's not true, that I've never read an author, but Flannery O'Connor is an author who just clicks very well for me. I was going to say I've never read one who clicks though, but that's not true. But she just clicks really well with me. What she writes is called Southern Gothic. And it's sort of an author that we'll talk about later that's similar, that I'd compare it to, is like William Kent Kruger. Or like you talk about the slice of life stuff that Stephen King writes. Like it's similar to what she writes here. Except I think what she does is a lot better than either King or Kruger, in my opinion. She writes about everyday people, often in absurd or unique positions, and in her words, what most of her stories are about people's encounters with grace. And often that's the grace of God, or sometimes that's showing grace to somebody else. And she's trying to explore grace from a bunch of different perspectives, and often talk about how grace shows up in sometimes violent ways, sometimes very humorous ways, sometimes very unexpected ways. There's lots of stories about people rejecting grace that's offered to them, whether from other people or from God. And I've never read a short story author who wrote so consistently and in such a compelling way. So my perception of short stories not too long ago was sort of like, it was sort of like the Arcanum Unbounded type of idea, which was so ignorant of me, of like, it's sort of like here's like an excerpt from the book or one scene from something, and just, they're sort of disposable. And Flannery O'Connor can do in 30 pages what a lot of authors can't do in 300. A Good Man is Hard to Find. The titular story in this is, and it's hard to talk about short stories without like spoiling the whole thing, so I'm going to tell you what that short story is about, and if you don't want to hear, that's fine, like skip forward a little bit. But A Good Man is Hard to Find is about a family that goes on a vacation, and they're set in like the 1950s probably, and they brought their curmudgeonly, annoying grandmother with them, and she's nagging on them and criticizing them the whole time. And the family has, their car breaks down, and they get confronted by 3 bandits. One of them called the Outcast, the Misfit. And the bandits take the family off and shoot all of them. And sort of the main crux of the short story is this confrontation between the curmudgeonly, grumpy grandmother and the misfit, and their different ideals, and an argument that they have. And I've not read a short story that moved me quite like that one did. And it's kind of difficult to get a handle on, like, what was the point of this at first? Because it's dark, it's kind of funny in a certain way. There's a certain sense of dark gallows humor that she employs. But she certainly makes you think. Like, their argument is almost pseudo-spiritual in nature, because it's about life and death and whether or not it's right to kill people or not. But when I tell you that this impacted me, like, I've gone back and reread A Good Man is Hard to Find, like that short story, probably 4 or 5 times at this point. Yeah, probably about 4 times. So yeah, like, if you are interested in short stories at all, now I should say, that is largely regarded as Flannery O'Connor's darkest story. So if you're like, yeesh, wow, the dark, Sam, harsh. Like, a lot of her stuff is not that dark. That one just happened to be, and really stuck with me, but it's actually not my favorite short story from her. Probably my favorite is called Parker's Back. And you can find somebody who reads it here on YouTube. It'll take you 30 minutes to listen to, and it's great. It's fantastic. It's like one of the best stories I read last year. So Flannery O'Connor is mainly known for her short stories, but she also wrote 3 novels as well. And I want to read more of her. And there's a good chance she could become one of my favorite authors of all time. So anyway, there's that. Speaking of Flannery O'Connor, let me talk about the book that I just finished up, which was Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. I've got this well loved or well hated, depending on how you look at it, paperback of it that I picked up because it was 50 cents. And Ordinary Grace is a book that kind of made the rounds on BookTube last year. Some people were reading it. And William Kent Kruger is a Minnesota author, and I'm from Minnesota. And this is a book about a young boy growing up in the 60s in a small town in Minnesota. And I was once a young boy growing up in a small town in Minnesota. So I was like, oh, I'll read that. And nobody prepared me for how sad this book is. It's about a young boy named Frank Drum, who's a pastor's son. He's got an older sister, he's got a younger brother, and he's 13, I believe. And over the course of, I forgot to put it over here, over the course of a summer, 5 people die in his small town. And it's about how he and his family deal with the death and the tragedy and maybe the loss of faith as well. And a lot of broken people. There are a lot of broken people in this book. For example, Frank's older sister has like a cleft lip that got repaired, but she's still pretty scarred on her mouth from it. His younger brother has a debilitating stutter. They have a close family friend who is blind and has this blind man has a relative who is deaf and has some mental disability. I'm trying to think of what else. There's people who have alcohol problems. So there's a lot of broken people that are in this book, and all about how they deal with these multiple deaths through the town, as many of them strike very, very close to home. And nobody prepared me for just how sad this book was. I think I mentioned that already. But also, it's one of those weird books, like Stephen Chbosky's Perks of Being a Wallflower, where you read it and you feel like, wow, this, or at least I did, felt like, wow, this describes so much of who I was and what my childhood was. And yet, you hear other people talk about it and you realize, like, oh, like everyone kind of felt that way. He wrote it in such a way that it feels universal. Although there were some weirdly specific things about this book that resonated with me. He's a middle child. I'm a middle child. I have a younger brother. A lot of the interactions between Frank and his younger brother felt very much like my interactions with my younger brother when I was a teenager. Things like feeling annoyed that he was tagging along, but also knowing that he's kind of my best friend. Trying to feel adult around him by like cussing, but then also being upset when he cusses. Feeling annoyed that he felt this need to like tell the truth to mom and dad when I wanted to like scrape stuff under the rug. So there's a lot of universal things about being an older brother that I felt connection there with the story. And then some of those just small town joys of like wandering around the town without a cell phone, being dropped off, at one point in the town, and just having the afternoon to yourself to visit stores or go wherever you want, or just kind of hang out. And you didn't have a phone, you didn't have mom and dad checking up on you or tracking your location. So some of that really connected with me in the book. What else here? There was an incident where Frank encountered a frog that got killed by some people who were being stupid and, were playing with firecrackers and blew the frog up. And eerily enough, like there was an incident when I was younger where I was out working in the garden and accidentally killed a frog with a garden rake. And like Frank cried, and I remember crying as a little boy over killing this stupid like garden frog. It's like, why am I crying over this? So there were just some things that are universal but also weirdly specific to me that made me connect with this story. So it's very slice of life. It is sad. Be prepared for that. There's some awkward but accurate bits about 13-year-old boys going through puberty that are in this book. Overall, I really liked it. There's a lot of similar things about grace between other people, showing compassion towards people, and then also receiving the grace of God, not understanding how the grace of God could be present in the middle of unimaginable tragedy that's brought up in the book. And then how like the pastor deals with it versus how the pastor's wife versus maybe the local town drunk, how they all deal with these difficult situations. And as it turns out, there may be, even in the first chapter, the concept of foul play. Maybe that some of these deaths are connected. Maybe some of them are murders, gets presented. And so a question of how, like who is behind this is an interesting one throughout the book. And some of these deaths, like one is a suicide in response to another death. So there's a lot of like dark and heavy things that happen. Even like, wow, even in a small town like that, yeah, there's dark stuff that occurs. But I liked it. I resonated a lot with it. It's not the deepest book you'll ever read. I think, frankly, Flannery O'Connor is a better author and explores these things better in 30 pages, like I said, than 300. But it's worth the read. It's enjoyable. It's entertaining. It's a fun book to read in a certain sense, although it is sad. So that's Ordinary Grace. It was a book I said at the beginning of the year was one of the 25 that I wanted to read, and now I have. So there's that. Let's move on to something a little bit different, and that is, I'll be somewhat brief here. We'll talk about The Anubis Gates by Tim Powers. So Tim Powers has been a favorite author of mine this year. I've just loved getting to read his stuff, and The Anubis Gates is not my favorite, but it is one of them. I read this with Jordan and Nikki from iWizard. It was a lot of fun getting to read a book with them. And Nikki and I both enjoyed it. Sadly, Jordan did not. You can check out our full discussion. And as he very well describes his reasons for why he didn't like them, although I believe that he is wrong. So this is like it is described as one of the early steampunk novels. But, like, it's not really. It's more just, like, an action fantasy novel set in, like, a Dickensian time. So it's more, like, swashbuckling than actually, like, oh, there's steampunk technology. But it's about, to say briefly, Egyptian sorcerers during the middle 19th century are upset by the British Empire expanding and the rise of Christianity, and that seems to be impacting their power in some way. So they seek to cast a spell that will summon the god Anubis to possess one of them, and then they'll invade London, the heart of the British Empire, to seek their horrible revenge. And the spell goes completely wrong. It ends up opening these gates in time, and people in the present day, or at least present day when he wrote the book, which was the 80s, figure out how to go through these rips in time forward and backwards. And so this billionaire, sort of at Jurassic Park style, wants to take people back in time to hear William Taylor Coleridge, the poet, give a speech. So he hires on a professor, a romantic history, English romantic history professor named Doyle, brings him onto the expedition to go back in time, hear Coleridge talk, and he'll sort of be the guide. And Doyle gets left back there in time, and Doyle must survive. And the cool thing about this book is that Doyle starts very much, he almost reminded me of like Thomas Senwin from Josiah Bancroft's Senwin Ascends. And he must, over the course of the book, go from being this limp-wristed, milksop, kind of weak English professor to embodying the ideals that he admires and has taught about. And it has to go from admiring these things to actually becoming that ideal, this swashbuckling adventurer by the end of the book. So I liked it a lot. It has got a lot of action in it. It has more to do with like Oliver Twist and meets Pirates of the Caribbean than like anything with Egypt. It's a lot faster moving than most of Tim Powers' other novels, so that was one of the complaints that Jordan had, which is fine. There's a lot of escapes through it, and it's very weird. It's like a sci-fi fantasy, like weird fiction novel. There's also a lot of like Lovecraft in it. Tim Powers has said that one of his favorite novels is That Hideous Strength, and if you've read That Hideous Strength, this is probably the most similar of any of his books to that one. So I liked it a lot. Of Tim Powers' novels, this is probably one of the ones that I'd like to reread the most. But as you heard from Jordan, and I know Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads recently read it as well and wasn't a fan of it, I really liked it. This is a solid 5 stars for me, guys. If you're a Gene Wolfe fan and you want to get into Tim Powers stuff, because Tim Powers deals with like symbolic storytelling a lot, similar to how Wolfe does, although he's not as dense or like mind-bendy as Wolfe. But if you're interested in Wolfe at all, like this is a great Powers novel to get started with it, which I talked about a bit in that discussion as well. So I love the Anubis Gates, guys. I know it won't work for everyone, but like if you want one of his ones that's like very adventure-y feeling, like this is the one. So yeah. Speaking of Tim Powers, somebody who could be said to be one of his modern-day disciples, somebody who's clearly got a lot of influence from him, is D.J. Butler. And I've been meaning to read D.J. Butler for a while. I've wanted to read his Witchy War books, which are coming up on the TBR for sure. But I expressed some interest in his Cunning Man novels, and the lovely folks at Baen, Jason reached out and was like, hey, would you be interested in reading them if we sent you a copy? And I said, absolutely. So they sent me The Cunning Man, which is book 1, and The Jupiter Knife, which is book 2. And these I also read back to back. I want to get back to doing that. I used to do that when I was younger, just read a series back to back, and I don't do that as much anymore, which is a real shame because the times that I've done that recently, I've loved what I read. So these books are set during the time of the Great Depression. Our main character is Hiram Woolley, and he is sort of a practitioner of folk magic, but also an extremely devout Mormon who lives in Utah and is a beet farmer. So he is my second favorite beet farmer in fiction, I guess, in storytelling. And he goes around and sort of solves everyday problems, both with true religion, in the sense of he'll pray for people, he'll help the widows and fatherless, but then also he uses like folk magic, which a lot of religious people would be very uncomfortable with, and in some ways he's uncomfortable with it. Add on top of that, his adopted son, who's a Navajo, if I remember correctly, his name's Michael, is an atheist and very much a materialist, a rationalist, who doesn't believe in any of this nonsense that his father's into. So there's an interesting clash between the two of them, and their banter throughout these books is great. Their relationship is one of the highlights of the book. And so this is often pitched as like Mormon Dresden Files. I even use that in my review for it, because it's just a good tagline. But whereas Dresden Files are much more like action novels that are like presented as mysteries, but they tend to be much more like action oriented, these truly are mysteries. And the magic is very good. There's, like I said, an exploration of where does magic end and religion begin. Maybe I should say that the other way around, where religion ends and magic begins. And Hiram Woolley's faith is challenged in some real, substantial ways. In terms of novels that I've read recently that deal with faith, and to be clear, a faith that's different from my own, so it's not just like, oh, I agree with this, so yay. But like in terms of novels that grapple with faith and belief and belief in God, this is one of the best ones I've read all year, maybe ever. These novels were great. They moved very fast, they were very entertaining, but also gave me a lot to chew on. So if you like themes of faith, religion, belief, challenging it, questioning it, coming to some sort of reconstruction on the other end of it, the Cunning Man books are definitely ones that I would recommend, very highly actually. And book 3 is coming out later this year. So let's get those sales numbers up, guys. Anyway, yeah, so The Cunning Man Books by DJ... Well, and let me say this. So one of the other things that I like is just how interesting Hiram Woolley is as a character. That the positive attributes of him that save the day are not his ability to swing a sword, kill a monster, defeat a wizard. His positive attributes that save the day are his kindness, his humility, his compassion for other people, his gentleness, being willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, those are the positive qualities that save the day in the end of these novels, which I've not read a fantasy novel like that, maybe ever, certainly not in a long time. So yeah, high recommendation for these. These are probably some of my favorite books that I've read this year. Last week, because we've gone too long already, I finished up the Book of the Long Sun by Gene Wolfe with Exodus from the Long Sun. And as proof that I don't just like 5 out of 5 stars everything Wolfe did, I'll say this. Do I like the Long Sun books? Yes. Do I like them as much as Book of the New Sun? Not even close. Night Side of the Long Sun, which is the first of the Quartet, is one of my favorite Wolfe books. But the next 3 I liked, but I wouldn't say that I loved them necessarily. I might need to reread them, because you find that a lot with Wolfe, that on the first read you're just kind of taking it in, and then on a reread things just start to fall into place more. You're able to pay more attention to character arcs, and the world building and what's happening next isn't as much the priority. So I suspect that will change on a reread. But these books are not divisive in the sense of like, oh, controversial, but they are divisive in the sense of like, some Wolfe fans are like, best thing he wrote, I love it, and some Wolfe fans are just like, meh, and I'm somewhere in the middle. So I like these ones. I'm glad that I read them as part of the bigger solar cycle. of which this is the second part, and Book of the New Sun is the first part, like, they're great. They improve the solar cycle as a whole. They don't do anything to diminish it. But on its own, it's not my favorite stuff that Wolfe has done. Like Nightside a good bit, and Exodus is a great conclusion to the Quartet. And there are some people who will like this more than Book of the New Sun. Patera Silk, the main character here, is much more likable than Severian. He's a much more easier protagonist to root for. But personally, sadly, was not like a 10 out of 10 for me. So really enjoyed them, though. Some of the best sci-fi that I've read this year, and Book of the Short Sun is next. So I may read something else from Wolfe coming up, but yeah, I'm glad to have finally gotten the Long Sun books under my belt. They've definitely been overdue. So anyway, that's it, guys. This is sort of some of the books that I read recently that I really liked. I'm going to be jumping into the next few books from the Long Price Quartet coming up, and then I'm going to be starting Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, which I will also be reading once again from Jordan over at iWizard. So this is my penance, this is my price for ripping off of his name. I'm forced to read books that we select together. No, it's a delight to read stuff with him. So I've got that coming up, and then I've also got the Ill-Earth War, which is book 2 in the Tales of Thomas Covenant by Stephen R. Donaldson. So I've got that coming up as well, reading that obviously with Jake from Nerd Level Rising, or Jake from State Farm, as my wife likes to call him, and Zach Shea. So that's sort of my upcoming plans, but I'm sure there may be a TBR video coming up next. Like, I do these TBRs, but then I always laugh at them later because I'm like, I like followed half of that, maybe. So anyway, guys, thank you for watching this. Hope you all are having a great day. Kind of muffed that. Hope you all are having a great day. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.